Hello and welcome to the Satish Jha show. 8 decades after the last war that had engaged the whole world, peace has been shattered in Europe. It's been noted by all, and the actors are the same: Europe, USA, and USSR, or remaining part of USSR. I say USSR because that's what is in the mind of Putin. Putin hasn't forgotten that USSR was a great empire, even though it was becoming economically weak, even though it collapsed. In his mind, it's USSR and all the countries that broke away from USSR, and to keep Russia as the single largest force there, they still, in his mind, remain as part of the Russian influence. Ukraine is the largest part of that. It's the largest geographical territory in Europe next to Russia only, bigger than every other European country. So Putin has been playing footsie for quite some time with NATO and America. Putin has remained for almost a quarter century as the head of Russia. And the dialogues that have been going on, America has been warning that this is going to happen, but hasn't been able to do anything about it. America saw the Crimea was taken over by Russia, nothing happened. So Russia has been inching forward. US has been only saber rattling, doing nothing concrete about it. And in any case, US will be quite, far from strategic in going to war with anything in Europe and with any large country as such. US doesn't have a history of winning a war since the Second World War. Barring, say, you can say, initial Senior George Bush's incursions into Iraq for a short period. And these are not the times of war. These are all, both are nuclear nations, and even NATO has nuclear capabilities. So war is quite far away. But the way US believing in market thinks is economy is very, very important. And right now, the situation is such that all the sanctions that US will impose on Russia or its people or its special people of special interest, about a dozen of them, close to Putin, incidentally not on Putin though. They will all be designed to weaken the economy. So while in the short run or medium run, people are going to be killed, cities are going to be destroyed, governments are going to change, US will come forward only with economic sanctions because these are not the times where two major powers can fight. So what is happening here is very simple. US understands policy in its own way. And the major part of its foreign policy has been to contain Russia. And Russia has been constantly under Putin trying to rise again. NATO is the force in between. And NATO has been engaging countries that left Russian influence and bringing them into the European influence, or rather NATO influence, or rather you can say the American influence. Clearly, if you understand real politics, that's a tough act to keep the peace going. As long as Putin is strong, that's not going to happen. He will constantly keep egging on in that direction because Russia remains a major power militarily, even though in terms of economy, it's no longer what it used to be. But that said, its economy is dependent primarily on energy, even there much more gas. It's the second largest producer of oil. So the question is, why does Putin want to do this? So as you saw, the debate is about what does Putin want? Does he want to control, to annex Ukraine as part of the new Russia? Or does he just want to install a government which is pro-Russian? Or how does he want to integrate its economy? What are the challenges in case he integrates all the others too? So the challenge for Putin is primarily that in order to grow, he needs a larger market. And these were part of their market, and no, they're no longer. They're all keen to become part of European setup. And if you noticed in the past several months, his demand constantly was that please don't ask Ukraine to become part of NATO. That's the only commitment he wanted. And that's the commitment US and NATO are not willing to give to him. Now, the question was that NATO could have sanctioned him, but both France and Germany are not willing to do that. Definitely, Germany and Italy declined to do that. They all want to have peace, but at the same time, they need to have relationship with USSR. German energy economy is dependent greatly on Russia, and that impacts its own decision to take any major bold step. And Europe and Russia are far more interdependent than what NATO as a intermediary agency would like it to be. So the challenge is that the beginning of this crisis can't be placed entirely at Putin's footstep. Europe, US, and its basically front body, NATO, they're all equally responsible for it. And they have had enough time. America's intelligence agencies have been warning for quite some time that Putin is going to invade. But if you remember, just a year ago, we had a man called Trump. Trump in the US is basically still rejoicing and saying that's a genius move made by Trump. That Trump has been able to make, in some ways, a much better move on Ukraine than America can imagine. Why does he say that? Clearly, he's a friend of Putin. He sees through the eyes of Putin. And the whole world is surprised that today, America is not able to stand by Ukraine as a collective. About a third of America, they are siding with Putin. These are the people who listen to Trump. Even though Republican Party's major leaders have come forward condemning Putin, the people who believe in Trump, they are supporting Putin, basically because that's what Trump believes in. He's still basically saying that Putin has come up with a master stroke. So that is the US, one third, two thirds kind of relationship between those who are for Ukraine are two thirds, those who are for Putin are one third. That's US. Within Europe, Germany and Italy have not allowed the veto to go on. And if you see, even the United Nations meeting which was held on Russia was chaired by Russia. This is the irony of the UN system. That UN system doesn't quite come together in terms of taking a very strong position on matters of war and matters of, that's one of the purposes of UN is to keep peace. But somehow the way it works, it hasn't been able to stop many, many wars. Question of moral ground. America, in many ways, doesn't have high moral ground. It can't just say, if you see Biden's statement, some call it very bold, some call it very weak. Both. Weak because if you just see, he basically says it's unjustifiable war. Which war was justified ever? I mean, if you think in terms of justification for war in these times, what can be the justification except one country wants to bring down another country because it has the power to do so? America, every single war America has acted in was a war of choice. No war is such that it was inevitable, that couldn't be avoided, that diplomacy couldn't bring it down. In one case, in the case of when Iraq moved into Kuwait, it was supposed to have been inspired by a suggestion from the US itself that Iraq could move into Kuwait, and that was the kind of strategy, let Iraq move into Kuwait so we can attack Iraq under that pretext. Later on, a new pretext was found, which was found to be totally false, which was of basically African connection to creating chemical weapons. In other words, these are wars of choice. They could be easily avoided. In fact, most wars are wars of choice, and there were no need for it, and people could have sat together and sorted it out. So Europe is clearly not a major player. It's basically US and Russia, and US dictates terms to NATO because foots the bill for NATO. No European country foots the bill for NATO, really. And Trump began talking about defunding NATO or to that extent, but America was not ready for that. And if you remember, if you see the way American foreign policy is shaping up, it's very clear that GOP, the Republicans, they have been egging Biden on to create a macho image that you have to, look down Russia or Putin directly in his eyes and beat him. They've been asking him to go to war effectively. But it's not something where America can go to war. In the beginning, it sounded like Biden was willing to go to war, but that won't happen. What is the role for India in it? Of course, India has about 20,000 students in Ukraine. About 5,000 apparently have left in the meantime. 15,000 are still there. The question is, what should India do to rescue them? The question is it a legal responsibility of the nation, or just a moral responsibility, or just a question of leadership? Much has been made out in Indian media of Europe basically saying that India hasn't taken a side. Now, I think Prime Minister Modi sounds like Nehruvian right now, which is non-aligned position. We are neither this side nor that side. We stand in the middle somewhere. And that's been India's position since Nehru's Panchshir and non-aligned movement was started. So whether Modi likes it or not, he's basically taking a leaf out of the book that Nehru wrote, that India hasn't taken a stand. I mean, India doesn't have any role to play in this. It doesn't have that kind of power, except vis-a-vis Russia. It has a few chips, and it could have called that in, but that's not strong enough to avert a war or make a major policy difference in Russia. So what is the solution to Ukraine crisis? Will it just stop here? Will it have major repercussions all over the globe? In fact, the first expectation was that for whatever reason, Biden has united China and Russia, which is not very good for American role in the world order. That's one. If you see from the point of view of the way forces emerging, China may basically renew its claim to Taiwan, may say that Taiwan is an integral part of China, and it doesn't even have to go to war. It just has to annex it, just like Russia did to Crimea, except that Russia had forces on Crimea on the ground. China doesn't have that. And if that happens, the world will be just watching helplessly. There is nothing the world can do. So Biden has been a foreign policy senator for a long time. He was chairman of Foreign Policy Relations Committee or Foreign Relations Committee for a very long time. And despite that, he has never been a person who acts in a way who can be decisive. He is a kind of thinking on the one hand or the other hand kind of guy so far. And you can see that he has not been seen as a big leader, except the Democrats have no choice but to say he's a big leader. He hasn't emerged as a big leader. Some find his speech very powerful. Many people have said that, but there are other people who are saying that, well, it's neither here nor there as well. So the question is, Biden has lost the leadership. He's lost the plot. He has allowed Russia and China to come together. And together, China alone is basically trying to compete with Russia on the world global scene. Russia and China access together is going to be much more powerful than whatever America can offer, even though the military force of America is bigger than China plus Russia plus Europe plus the rest of the world effectively. But it's not just the military force. It's the total logistics of it. It is opening up so many fronts. It's not going to work the way America was able to until China became as big as it's become. It was 50 years back, almost to the day, that Henry Kissinger decided to go with Nixon to Beijing and open up a Chinese possibility. That was 71 or 72, I think. And since then, China has been growing from strength to strength. Vis-a-vis India, if you look at 20 years back, the world used to say that India is about 10 to 12 years behind China. 15 years back, we were saying, well, India is beginning to catch up. But in the past 8 years, India has fallen way, way, way behind. No longer is a question of India catching up. Today, at one time, 30 years back, the GDP of both countries per capita was about equal. Today, China's GDP per capita is 6 times India's. So China is a major power, and India just doesn't measure in that scheme of things. So India doesn't have a role to play beyond rescuing its own people if it really wants to be like major nations are as of now. So you may hear the great conversation that our Prime Minister may have with Russian president. But that's not something which is going to influence anything, because conversations are not about what you talk, they are about from what position you talk. And India doesn't seem to have a position beyond a very polite, friendly advice or suggestion as such. So how is it going to play out? The world market is going to respond badly. It's going to you will see stock markets plummeting. Inflation will happen. Energy prices will go up. Logistics is going to be constrained. America has already sanctioned in such a way, Russia in such a way that technology exports to Russia will be curtailed or banned. Banks will become under pressure. More than $1 trillion of banking of Russia has been put under pressure by US. Now, Ukraine is demanding this international payment system called SWIFT should be cut off from Russia. That would be a major step, because if you cut Russia out of through SWIFT, that will be a very swift way to contain Russia in terms of it will have no possibility of any remittances from anywhere. And that can really ruin its economy. But don't forget, Russia has been used to living in a world of its own without any major economy dealing with it except its own, you can say, backyard or its own allies, basically. So Russia is used to that. It was a socialist economy. It can live within closed borders for quite some time. It won't become quite North Korea because it has so much of technological prowess, except without global market, it will not be able to grow at the same pace. In any case, ruble has been under pressure for quite some time. In any case, oil has been under pressure because if you raise the price of oil and reduce the output, your revenue is going to be less, and that impacts Russian national income. So effectively, this war is not going to end well for Putin because he will be emaciated financially, economically. Of course, he has military power to annex these countries, but instead of being seen as a very astute, calm, cool player who ran KGB once, he now is being seen as something has gone wrong. We don't understand Putin. That kind of message has gone to people. The protests in Russia, Moscow, they have been kind of unprecedented, that very quickly people came on the road. They said, we don't want war. And Putin had been saying something and acting differently. He said he'll probably not go to war until yesterday, and then suddenly moves in. He will continue to say something and do something else. That's Putin. And that's almost, I think, every leader, except in the case of Putin, is most marked. If you want to understand what Machiavelli thought, you can always read from the Putin's book. So now we are at a place in the world where it's once again post-World War II world, where 80 years later, almost 80 years later, we are again seeing the possibility of a very unstable world. And no one leader is responsible for it. Biden, Putin, and European collective leadership, they're all equally responsible. The rest of the world doesn't have a role to play in this scheme of things. And All they can do is basically grin and bear it at this point in time, watch, tighten their belt, and see how the whole thing unfolds. Because if diplomacy hasn't worked this far, it won't work unless and until Putin achieves some of his goals. And his goals are they to basically annex Ukraine once again, or basically install a puppet government there, or some kind of middle path. Just take the eastern part, annex that, and let the western part remain under a friendly regime, and ensure that it won't go unfriendly, it won't be pro-Europe. Basically, what he wants is a Ukraine which is pro-Russia rather than pro-Europe. It's as simple as that. And as long as the West allows that to happen, this war will basically averted or not continue or come to quickly an end. But are we all willing to do that? That's the question of, let's see, statesmanship. We need a taller leader than currently we have on the world map. And but whatever has happened, it is a matter of most grave concern since the World War II. And we all need to keep our thoughts and prayers for Ukrainians on the one hand, and pray for the world at this point in time, and have this conversation everywhere possible and bring sanity to the extent we can. With that, I take you leave for the next episode of the Satish Jha show, and pray for the best. Thank you.